Did you know that a seemingly innocuous paper cartridge for the Lee Enfield rifle could have acted as the spark that ignited the Indian independence movement in 1857, almost a century before India ultimately achieved its freedom? There were already numerous underlying factors fueling the animosity of the Indian population towards the British East India Company. The net result of these events was the final end of the Mughal dynasty and the abolishment of the East India Company as well. Welcome to our channel. Today we'll be talking about the Indian Sepoy Rebellion. The Indian Sepoy Rebellion, also known as the Indian Mutiny, or the First War of Indian Independence, was a significant event in Indian history that occurred in 1857. It was a revolt against British rule, led by Indian sepoys, or native soldiers, who were under the employ of the British East India Company. The word sepoy comes from the Persian word sipahi, which means soldier or horseman. The term was used during the Mughal Empire to refer to soldiers who served in the army of the emperor. When the British East India Company began to expand its military presence in India in the 18th century, they also began to recruit Indian soldiers to serve in their armies. These soldiers were initially known as Indian Sepoys, or simply sepoys, a term that had been adopted from the Mughal Empire. Over time, the term sepoy became synonymous with Indian soldiers serving in the British Indian Army. So what were some of the causes of the rebellion? Social and religious. The British had introduced many social and religious reforms that were seen as an attack on traditional Indian customs and beliefs. Economic. The British introduced policies that were perceived as exploitative by the Indian population, including heavy taxes, land revenue, and the use of Indian resources for British industrialization. Political. The British East India Company had annexed several Indian states, which resulted in the loss of power and status for Indian rulers and their armies. In addition, the Indian people were excluded from participating in the administration of their own country. Military. The Indian soldiers, known as sepoys, were treated poorly by the British officers, and were given lower salaries than their British counterparts. They were also subjected to discriminatory policies, such as being prohibited from rising above a certain rank. The General Services Enlistment Act of 1856 was a law passed by the British East India Company that required all new Indian recruits to the British Indian Army to serve overseas if necessary. This effectively ended the long-standing tradition of Indian soldiers serving only within their own country. This was seen as a significant departure from tradition and a violation of the sepoys' religious and cultural beliefs that prohibited them from traveling overseas. As a result, the sepoys felt that their way of life and their cultural and religious beliefs were being threatened by the British. The act also stipulated that the soldiers would receive a lower rate of pay for service outside India. This added to the existing grievances of the sepoys regarding their inferior pay and conditions compared to British soldiers. The sepoys felt that they were being treated unfairly, and that their contribution to the British Indian Army was not being recognized or rewarded appropriately. The pattern 1853 Enfield rifled musket, designed by the British engineer William Pritchard, was introduced to India in the 1850s, just before the Indian Rebellion of 1857. This superior weapon was quickly recognized for its greater accuracy and range compared to previous muskets, and was swiftly adopted by the British Army in 1853. Rumors quickly spread that the British had introduced new cartridges for the Enfield rifles, which needed to be bitten off before loading and were greased with cow and pig fat. These rumors were deeply offensive to Hindu and Muslim soldiers alike, with cows being considered sacred to Hindus and pigs being considered unclean by Muslims. The sepoys adamantly refused to use the cartridges, and when they were punished for their insubordination, they rose up in rebellion. Mongol Pandey, a native of Nagwa village in present-day Uttar Pradesh, was a sepoy in the British East India Company's army and played a significant role in the events leading up to the Sepoy Rebellion of 1857. His actions, which included a dispute with a British officer in March 1857 over the use of new Enfield rifle cartridges greased with animal fat, are widely regarded as the spark that ignited the rebellion. Despite being arrested and executed, Ponde's rebellion inspired other sepoys to join the cause, making him a symbol of resistance and rallying support for the rebellion. On the 24th of April 1857, Lieutenant Colonel George Carmichael Smith, the commanding officer of the 3rd Bengal Light Cavalry in Meerut, ordered 90 of his men to parade and perform firing drills. All except 5 of the men on parade refused to accept their cartridges, because they said that they were greased with cow and pig fat. On May 9, 1857, these 85 Indian sepoys were court-martialed for disobeying their orders. The sepoys received a harsh and unjust punishment, 10 years of hard labor. On the evening of May 10, a group of sepoys broke into the Meerut jail and released their fellow soldiers, who had been arrested. The sepoys then proceeded to attack and kill several British officers and their families. The sudden uprising caught British troops stationed in Meerut off guard, and they were unable to contain the violence. On May 11, sepoys captured Delhi, with their numbers swelled to over 50,000 by other rebel forces. They proclaimed Bahadur Shah Zafar as their leader, and he eventually joined their cause. The British took refuge in the fortified British Residency, which was attacked but repulsed. The sepoys then laid siege to the Residency, cutting off its supply lines and causing many deaths from lack of food, water, and medical supplies. A British relief force arrived on June 8, but was unable to break through. A larger force of over 10,000 soldiers, under General Sir Archdale Wilson, was sent next. The Kashmiri Gate was one of the key points of defense of the rebellion during the siege of Delhi. The gate was heavily fortified and manned by a large number of rebel soldiers, making it a formidable obstacle for the British forces. The British had attempted to breach the gate several times before, but had been repulsed each time. The rebels had constructed a number of defensive positions around the gate, including trenches, barricades, and artillery emplacements, making it difficult for the British to advance. Finally, on September 14, 1857, the British launched a major assault on the gate. The assault was led by Major William Hodson, who commanded a force of about 300 men, including both British and Indian soldiers. The assault began with a heavy bombardment of the gate by British artillery, which succeeded in destroying some of the rebel defences. The British then advanced towards the gate, facing heavy resistance from the rebel soldiers. The fighting was intense and brutal, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. However, the British were eventually able to breach the gate, using a combination of artillery fire, bayonet charges, and hand-to-hand combat. Once the gate was breached, the British soldiers poured through, engaging in fierce close-quarters combat with the rebel soldiers. Despite facing determined resistance, the British were able to clear the gate and secure the area around it. The breaking of the Kashmiri Gate was a major turning point in the siege, as it allowed the British to establish a foothold inside the city and begin the process of driving the rebels out. The gate itself became a symbol of British triumph, and it remains a significant landmark in Delhi to this day. After the defeat of the rebel sepoys in the siege of Delhi, many of them were subjected to harsh treatment by the British authorities. The British were deeply angered by the rebellion, which they saw as a betrayal of their authority and a threat to their rule in India. The sepoys who had fought against the British were viewed as traitors, and were often subjected to severe punishment. Many were executed or imprisoned. The British also undertook a campaign of reprisals against the civilian population of Delhi, which they believed had supported the rebels. The city was sacked and looted, and many civilians were killed or injured in the fighting. Bahadur Shah Zafar, the last Mughal emperor, was captured by the British and put on trial for his alleged role in the rebellion. Zafar was accused of providing support to the rebel sepoys, and was held responsible for the violence that had occurred during the rebellion. Zafar was found guilty by the British authorities, and was exiled to Burma, now Myanmar, along with his wife, children, and grandchildren. He was placed under house arrest, and was forbidden from leaving Rangoon, or engaging in political activities. Zafar died in Rangoon on November 7, 1862, at the age of 87. He was buried in a simple grave in a cemetery in Rangoon, which has since become a site of pilgrimage for many Indians. Zafar's exile and subsequent death marked the end of the Mughal Empire, and the beginning of direct British rule over India. The Sepoy Rebellion of 1857 ultimately failed to achieve its goals, and the British were able to regain control over India. Several factors contributed to the failure of the rebellion. Firstly, the lack of centralized leadership and a clear plan or strategy hindered the rebels' ability to coordinate and mount an effective challenge. The rebellion consisted mainly of localized uprisings, with little coordination between different rebel groups. Secondly, the rebellion lacked widespread support from the Indian population. While many Indians were dissatisfied with British colonial rule, there was no consensus on what should replace it. Religious and regional divisions among Indians made it challenging to form a united front against the British. Thirdly, the British effectively used their military and administrative resources to suppress the rebellion. The British forces were better equipped and trained than the rebel forces, allowing them to swiftly quash uprisings in different parts of India. Additionally, the British employed divide and rule tactics to exploit divisions among the rebels and convince some Indian princes to side with them, further fragmenting the rebellion. Lastly, the British learned from the rebellion's mistakes and implemented reforms to address some of the underlying causes of the rebellion. They abolished the East India Company and introduced administrative and military reforms to improve governance in India. The rebellion exposed the East India Company's mismanagement and exploitation of Indian resources and people, which led to widespread discontent and unrest. The British Crown took over the company's governance of India following the rebellion, with Queen Victoria being declared Empress of India in 1858. The East India Company Act of 1858 abolished the company's political and administrative functions and transferred them to the British Crown, while the company's commercial operations continued until 1874. The act marked the end of the company's 100-year rule over India, and the beginning of British direct rule over the country. We hope you found this video informative and educational. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. Thank you for watching.